Under the dim light of a cold winter morning in Vermont, a man with trembling hands carved away at a block of cedar. Each cut seemed to slice deeper into his own wounds, wounds no one could see. 5 years ago, Dr. Jonathan Hale had been one of the country's most promising neurosurgeons, saving lives with precision that bordered on miraculous. But in a single night, his steady hands failed. His wife, the love of his life, died under his scalpel. The world called it a complication. Jonathan called it murder by his own hand. Since that day, he had sworn never to touch another patient. Yet destiny had other plans, plans that would soon arrive on his doorstep, demanding the one thing he had vowed never to give again: hope. Jonathan Hale had spent 5 years hiding from the world. Once a renowned neurosurgeon at Harvard Medical Center, he now lived in a weathered cabin on the edge of a small Vermont town, where the only sound was the rhythmic scrape of his carving knife. He had traded scalpels for chisels, and operating rooms for the smell of sawdust. It was the only way he could quiet the voices of guilt that haunted his nights. His life was quiet, until the day a black limousine pulled up to his cabin. From it stepped a man who looked as though he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. His name was William Anderson, a wealthy industrialist from New York, known for his power and influence. But at that moment, power meant nothing. His eyes were hollow, consumed by fear and desperation. "Dr. Hale?" William's voice cracked despite his attempt at control. "My daughter, Emily, she was in a car accident 6 months ago. She's paralyzed from the waist down. We've tried every hospital, every specialist. No one can help her. They all say there's no hope." Jonathan barely looked at him. "Then believe them. I'm not a doctor anymore." William's jaw tightened. "You were more than a doctor. You were a pioneer. You developed techniques in neural pathway reconstruction no one else dared to try. I've read everything about your work. You were on the verge of something extraordinary, until I killed my wife on the table." Jonathan interrupted, his voice low and sharp. "You want me to experiment on your daughter the way I experimented on her? I won't do it." For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the wind rattling the cabin windows. William took a deep breath and set a photograph on Jonathan's workbench. It was a picture of a young woman with auburn hair, smiling brightly at the camera. "This is Emily. She's 19. She used to dance, ballet, contemporary everything. Now she can't even move her legs. She's slipping away, Dr. Hale. Not just physically, but emotionally. She's given up. Please, if you won't do it for me, do it for her. Just meet her. That's all I ask." Jonathan's hands clenched around his carving knife. He wanted to refuse, to tell the man to leave and never come back. But as his eyes lingered on the photograph, something stirred inside him. The girl's smile was hauntingly similar to his wife's, the same spark, the same life. For the first time in years, the walls he had built around his heart began to crack. Against his better judgment, Jonathan agreed to meet Emily. The next afternoon, William brought her to the cabin. She sat in a wheelchair, her posture stiff, her expression defiant. Her eyes, though beautiful, were filled with anger. "So you're the miracle worker my father keeps talking about," she said coldly. "Let me guess, you think you can fix me too?" Jonathan met her gaze without flinching. "No. I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to teach you how to fight back." She frowned. "With what? My legs don't work." He walked to his workbench and handed her a small piece of cedar and a carving knife. "Then start with your hands. Carving requires patience, precision, and control. Every movement matters. You'll hate it at first. But if you stick with it, you'll get stronger. Not just here." He tapped her hand. "But here." He pointed to her head. Emily glared at him, but she took the wood. The knife felt heavy in her grip. The first attempt was clumsy, and the blade slipped, nicking her finger. She cursed under her breath. "Good," Jonathan said calmly. "Pain means you're alive. Try again." And so, their journey began, not in a hospital, but in a dusty old workshop where broken people learn how to carve themselves whole again. The first week was the hardest. Emily came to Jonathan's workshop every afternoon, pushed reluctantly by her father, who stayed in the car, giving them space. The girl who once twirled on stage now sat in her wheelchair, her arms stiff, her movements jerky. Each time the carving knife slipped or the wood splintered, she would throw it down in frustration. "This is pointless," she snapped on the third day, her voice trembling with anger. "My legs are dead. I'm dead. Why are we doing this?" Jonathan didn't flinch. He simply picked up the piece of cedar, handed it back to her, and said, "Because as long as your hands can move, you're not done yet. You're still here, Emily." She glared at him, but she didn't quit. The small cuts she made on the wood became less random, more deliberate. Slowly, her fingers began to respond with a little more precision each day. Jonathan didn't push her to talk about her accident, her pain, or the life she lost. He knew the wood would draw those confessions out on its own. On the fifth day, she finally spoke. "It was raining," she said quietly as she carved. "We were coming back from a performance. My best friend was driving. A deer jumped out, she swerved, we hit a tree. She walked away with a few scratches. I woke up in the hospital and they told me I'd never dance again." Jonathan listened, saying nothing. Sometimes silence was the best medicine. Emily's anger softened into something else, grief. Her hands trembled as she continued shaping the block. "You know what's worse than not walking? Watching everyone look at you like you're broken. Like they're sad for you but also relieved it's not them." Jonathan finally spoke. "They're wrong, Emily. You're not broken. You're just rebuilding." As the days passed, he began teaching her more than carving. He introduced exercises to strengthen her grip, improve her coordination, and stimulate her nervous system. He explained how the brain could rewire itself, how new pathways could form if she pushed herself hard enough. One evening, after her session, William approached Jonathan outside the cabin. "She's different," he said, almost in disbelief. "She smiles now." "Not much, but it's there. What are you doing to her?" Jonathan's gaze drifted to the stars. "I'm not healing her. She's healing herself. I'm just showing her how." But the fragile progress was soon tested. One afternoon, Emily's knife slipped badly, cutting her palm. The pain was sharp, blood running down her wrist. She froze, panic rising. Jonathan knelt beside her, gently wrapping her hand with a cloth. "Look at me," he said firmly. "Pain is part of this. You can either let it stop you or let it make you stronger." Emily looked into his eyes, eyes that carried their own storms. For the first time, she saw that he wasn't just a mentor, he was someone who had clawed his way back from his own darkness. "I'll keep going," she whispered. That night, Jonathan stayed up carving alone. The smell of cedar filled the air as he shaped a small wooden figure, a dancer mid-spin. He placed it on her workbench the next morning without a word. When Emily arrived, she saw it, and for the first time since her accident, she cried, not from pain, but from something she thought she'd lost forever: hope. From that day forward, her determination doubled. She spent hours practicing, her hands blistered, her shoulders sore. Every stroke of the knife, every grain of wood shaped under her fingers, felt like a small victory. Slowly, she began to feel alive again. Jonathan too felt something shifting within himself. Teaching Emily was forcing him to confront his own guilt, to open the doors he had locked for years. The scars on both their souls were different, yet strangely the same. But as the bond between them grew, whispers of the past began to surface. A local doctor, curious about why Jonathan was working with a patient again, started asking questions. Rumors spread, about the disgraced surgeon and the girl in the wheelchair. Jonathan ignored them, focusing on Emily's progress. Yet deep inside, he knew this peace wouldn't last forever. Winter deepened, wrapping the small Vermont town in snow and silence. The workshop became Emily's sanctuary. She arrived every day bundled in thick scarves, her father's car leaving a fresh trail through the white drifts. Inside, the crackle of the wood stove and the smell of cedar welcomed her. The cold didn't matter. What mattered was the knife in her hand and the wood waiting to be shaped. Jonathan noticed the subtle changes first. Her fingers no longer shook when she carved. Her cuts were cleaner, smoother. She had begun forming small shapes, birds, flowers, dancers, each one more refined than the last. Her grip grew stronger, her coordination more precise. He could almost see the neurons in her brain firing, finding new pathways, rebuilding what had been lost. But progress was never a straight line. Some days, Emily was on fire, focused, determined, unstoppable. Other days, she fell into frustration, the weight of her wheelchair dragging at her spirit. On one such afternoon, she threw the wood across the room. "This isn't working!" she shouted, tears streaking her face. "I'm still stuck. I'm never going to dance again. What's the point?" Jonathan didn't raise his voice. Instead, he handed her another block of cedar. "Then carve the anger out of this one," he said softly. "Scream at the wood. Break it if you have to. But don't stop." Emily stared at him, breathing hard, then took the wood. Her knife dug into it with fierce energy, each stroke rough and uneven. But as she worked, her breathing slowed, her tears dried, and the chaos in her movements softened into something controlled. She didn't realize it, but this was therapy, not just for her hands, but for her soul. That night, Jonathan sat by the fire, staring into the flames. He hadn't felt this sense of purpose in years. Teaching Emily reminded him of why he became a doctor, to heal, to give hope. But with every step forward, a shadow from his past crept closer. He knew it was only a matter of time before someone tried to tear down what they were building. 2 weeks later, William arrived earlier than usual. His face was pale, his voice tense. "Jonathan, have you seen this?" He handed him a folded newspaper. The headline read, "Disgraced surgeon secretly treating patient without approval." Jonathan's stomach dropped. The article recounted the tragedy of his wife's death, the revoked licenses, the accusations of reckless experimentation. It claimed he was once again playing God with a vulnerable young woman. Emily wheeled herself in mid-conversation. "What's going on?" she asked. Jonathan hesitated, then handed her the paper. Her eyes scanned the words, her hands trembling. When she looked up, anger burned in her gaze. "Is this true? Did you lose your license because of what happened to your wife?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. I made a mistake. I was trying to save her, but I took risks I shouldn't have. They said I crossed the line, and maybe they were right. I promised I'd never touch another patient. That's why I didn't tell you." Emily's jaw tightened. "You should have told me. You're no better than the doctors who treated me like a case file instead of a person." Jonathan's chest ached at her words. "You're right. I should have. But Emily, everything we've done here, it's not an experiment. It's therapy. You're the one doing the work. I'm just guiding you." William stepped in. "Emily, he's helping you. You've improved more in weeks than in 6 months of hospital therapy." She glared at them both, then turned her wheelchair sharply and left the workshop. Jonathan watched her go, feeling the sting of failure. For the first time since they began, she didn't return the next day. Or the day after. 3 days later, he found her sitting by the frozen lake behind the cabin, carving a small wooden bird. Her movements were slow, but steady. "You're stubborn," she said without looking at him. Jonathan managed a faint smile. "So are you." She finished the carving and held it up. "This isn't about you, or your past, or what the world thinks of you. This is about me. My life. My choice." She placed the bird in his hand. "If I'm going to keep doing this, it's going to be on my terms. No secrets. No lies. Deal?" He closed his fingers around the bird, feeling its fragile strength. "Deal." From that day forward, their sessions changed. Emily wasn't just a student anymore, she was a partner in her own recovery. Jonathan taught, but he also listened. They worked not just on carving, but on exercises to stimulate her legs, tiny movements at first, barely noticeable. Sometimes she swore she felt a twitch, a spark. Hope, once a fragile ember, was now a flame neither of them could ignore. Spring crept slowly into Vermont, melting the snow and filling the air with the scent of wet earth. As the landscape transformed, so did Emily. Her hands, once clumsy and uncertain, now moved with grace and control. Each carving she created reflected a piece of her inner journey: birds spreading wings, dancers in motion, trees bending but unbroken. Jonathan kept every piece she gave him, lining them on the shelves of the workshop like trophies of survival. Yet it wasn't just her hands that were changing. During their exercises, Jonathan noticed tiny flickers of movement in her legs. At first, he thought he imagined it, but when he mentioned it, Emily grinned. "I felt it too," she said breathlessly. "It's like my legs are waking up." He kept the news quiet, knowing recovery wasn't guaranteed. But deep inside, he felt hope blooming. For the first time in years, he believed in miracles again. Their sessions grew longer, spilling into evenings where the workshop glowed under soft lantern light. Jonathan taught her advanced carving techniques, curved cuts, intricate detailing. At the same time, he encouraged her to challenge her limits, reaching farther, holding her posture, pushing her muscles to remember what they once knew. One evening, as Emily worked on a delicate sculpture of a dancer, she asked the question Jonathan had been dreading. "Why did you become a surgeon?" He hesitated, the memories heavy. "Because I wanted to fix people. To make the impossible possible. And for a while I did. But then I lost someone I loved, and I realized there are some things you can't fix with skill alone." Emily's voice softened. "Your wife?" Jonathan nodded. "Her name was Claire. She had an aneurysm. I thought I could save her, but I made a mistake. The surgery failed. I failed her." Emily studied his face, her hands still. "You didn't fail her. You tried. That's what matters." Her words were simple, but they pierced the armor he had worn for so long. For the first time, he let himself believe maybe forgiveness was possible, even if only from himself. Meanwhile, the world outside their bubble was closing in. Dr. Thomas Green, a neurologist at the local hospital, had been following Emily's progress with suspicion. He had heard whispers about her therapy sessions and began pressing William with questions. "Do you even know what he's doing to your daughter?" Green asked during a tense phone call. "Hale isn't licensed. He's dangerous." William defended Jonathan, but doubts gnawed at him. He knew the risks, yet he couldn't deny the results. Emily was changing before his eyes, stronger, happier, alive. Green's curiosity soon turned to hostility. He arrived unannounced at the workshop one afternoon, his voice sharp as he confronted Jonathan. "You're practicing medicine without approval. You could be arrested for this." Jonathan stood his ground. "I'm not performing surgery. I'm teaching her to carve wood." Green sneered. "Don't play games. You and I both know what you're doing. If she gets hurt, if this goes wrong, it's on you." Emily, overhearing, wheeled herself between them. Her eyes blazed with defiance. "It's my choice, Dr. Green. My body. My life. If I want to take risks, that's up to me, not you." Green faltered, unprepared for her fierce independence. "You're being manipulated," he muttered before storming out. After he left, Jonathan felt the weight of the confrontation settle in his chest. "You didn't have to defend me," he said quietly. Emily smirked. "Yes, I did. Because this isn't just about you anymore. It's about me taking my life back." That night, Emily stayed longer than usual, working on a new sculpture. It was a figure of a woman rising from broken pieces, her body stitched together with delicate patterns, her arms stretched toward the sky. When she finished, she placed it on Jonathan's bench. "This is me," she said simply. Jonathan looked at the sculpture, his throat tight. "It's beautiful." As the days passed, Emily's physical therapy intensified. Jonathan added exercises that pushed her limits, guiding her through painful stretches and balance training while she clung to parallel bars he built from old wood. Sweat dripped down her face, but she never gave up. Then, one afternoon, it happened. As she held herself between the bars, her legs trembled, and took a small step. Just one, but it was enough to make Jonathan's breath catch. Emily gasped, tears streaming down her face. "I did it," she whispered. "I actually did it." Jonathan smiled through his own tears. "You did more than that, Emily. You proved everyone wrong." The progress was still fragile, but that single step ignited a fire in both of them. They knew there would be setbacks, but nothing could take away the moment they witnessed a miracle. Emily's first step became the turning point. Every day after, she worked harder than before, gripping the wooden bars until her arms ached, forcing her legs to remember their forgotten rhythm. The steps were shaky, uneven, and often ended with her collapsing into the wheelchair, but she didn't care. Each time she fell, she got up again. Jonathan watched her progress with a mix of pride and fear. He knew recovery was unpredictable. There were no guarantees. But Emily's determination was something medicine couldn't measure. She wasn't just fighting for her legs, she was fighting for her life. One evening, as she practiced, she looked at him with a grin. "Do you know what I miss the most?" "What?" he asked, handing her a towel. "Spinning," she said softly. "When I danced, the world would blur around me, and for a moment, it felt like flying. I'd give anything to feel that again." Jonathan's heart clenched. He wanted to promise her she'd dance again, but he knew false hope could be cruel. Instead, he said, "Then let's work toward that. One step at a time." As her body grew stronger, so did the whispers of her progress. Videos of her walking short distances with support surfaced online, posted by a local who had seen her training. They spread quickly, attracting media attention. Reporters began calling William, asking questions. Some painted Jonathan as a hero who had discovered a revolutionary therapy. Others called him reckless, accusing him of exploiting a vulnerable girl. The pressure mounted when Dr. Green returned, this time with hospital administrators. They demanded Jonathan stop the therapy immediately, citing medical ethics and legal risks. "You're not licensed," Green said coldly. "You have no right to treat her." Emily's voice cut through the tension. "Stop talking about me like I'm not here. I'm not a case. I'm not your property. I'm a person, and I choose to keep working with him." William backed his daughter. "This is her decision. You have no authority to take it away." The administrators left, furious but powerless. Jonathan knew they wouldn't give up easily. The more progress Emily made, the more attention and scrutiny they attracted. Despite the chaos, Emily's recovery accelerated. One afternoon, she managed to walk across the room using only a cane Jonathan had crafted for her. She was trembling, drenched in sweat, but when she reached the far wall, she turned back with a radiant smile. Jonathan clapped, unable to hide his pride. "You're unstoppable." That night, William invited Jonathan to dinner at their estate as a thank you. It was the first time Jonathan had left the cabin in months. The mansion was grand, filled with memories of better days. Emily greeted him at the door, balancing on her cane. "Pretty good, huh?" she teased. "You're incredible," he replied, meaning every word. Dinner was warm and filled with laughter, a stark contrast to the loneliness Jonathan had grown used to. For a few hours he felt like part of a family again. But as the night ended, William pulled him aside. "You've done more for her than any doctor. But you're also taking all the risk. If this blows up, they'll come after you." Jonathan nodded. "I know. But she's worth it." A few days later, Emily revealed something new: she wanted to dance again. Not just walk, dance. Jonathan hesitated. "That's a big leap." "I know," she said, determination blazing. "But I need this. I don't care how hard it is. Help me." He couldn't say no. Together, they cleared a space in the workshop. Jonathan built a wooden bar, and Emily began practicing slow, controlled movements. At first, it was almost comical. Her steps were clumsy, her balance shaky. But she kept going, repeating each movement until it became fluid. As she moved, Jonathan noticed something extraordinary. She wasn't just regaining muscle memory, she was regaining confidence, grace, and a piece of her soul. The girl who once stared at the floor in defeat now lifted her chin high. One evening, she performed a short routine she had been secretly practicing. It was far from perfect, but it was beautiful. Jonathan stood frozen, watching her spin, just once, before catching herself. Tears filled his eyes. "You're dancing," he whispered. Emily laughed through her own tears. "I'm flying." But their triumph was short-lived. That same night, an official letter arrived for Jonathan, a cease and desist order from the state medical board. If he continued working with Emily, he would face criminal charges. He stared at the paper, his chest tight. For years, he had avoided the medical world, believing he had no place in it. Now, just as he was finding redemption, they were trying to rip it away. Emily found him sitting alone in the workshop, the letter in his hands. "They're trying to stop us, aren't they?" "Yes," he said bitterly. "They'll shut this down. They'll take everything we've built." She took the letter and tore it in half. "They can't take me. They can't take what I've learned, what I've become. I'm not giving up. And neither are you." Jonathan looked at her, this young woman who had been broken but refused to stay that way, and felt something inside him harden. They would keep fighting, no matter the cost. The next weeks felt like walking a tightrope. On one side was progress. Emily's steps were becoming steadier, her movements more fluid, her spirit unbreakable. On the other side was danger. Rumors and threats from the medical board grew louder, circling like vultures. Jonathan could almost feel the storm approaching. Emily, however, refused to let fear control her. "Let them come," she said one afternoon as she practiced at the bar. "I'm not hiding. If they want to see what we're doing, let them watch." Jonathan admired her strength, but he worried. "They won't just watch, Emily. They'll twist everything, make it sound like I'm exploiting you. Then we'll prove them wrong." She shot back, determination flashing in her eyes. One morning, a news crew showed up outside the workshop, cameras pointed, microphones ready. They wanted to interview Emily, to see the miracle girl, who was walking again under the guidance of a disgraced surgeon. William tried to send them away, but Emily rolled her wheelchair to the door, cane in hand. "If they want a story," she said, "they'll hear it from me." The cameras rolled as she stood, gripping her cane, her voice steady. "My name is Emily Anderson. 6 months ago, they told me I'd never walk again. But I'm walking. Not because of some magic surgery, not because of luck, but because I refused to give up, and because someone believed in me when no one else did. Dr. Hale didn't just treat me. He gave me back my life. Whatever they say about him, I know the truth. He's not dangerous. He's the reason I'm standing here." The clip went viral. Support poured in from people across the country, patients, families, even doctors who admired Jonathan's work. But with support came backlash. Medical authorities doubled their efforts, claiming Jonathan's methods were unverified and potentially harmful. Jonathan tried to block out the noise, focusing on Emily's recovery. But at night, alone in the workshop, he questioned himself. Was he giving her real hope or just delaying the inevitable heartbreak? The guilt he carried from his wife's death whispered in the darkness, reminding him how easily things could go wrong. One evening, while Emily practiced, she noticed his distraction. "You're somewhere else," she said, stopping mid-step. He forced a smile. "Just tired." "Liar," she replied gently. "You're scared. You think this will end the same way it did with Claire." Jonathan froze. He hadn't spoken his wife's name to Emily since the night he confessed. "How do you? I've seen the way you look at me when I fall," she said. "Like you're watching it happen all over again. But Jonathan, I'm not her. And this time, you're not failing." Her words pierced the fog of doubt, anchoring him back to the present. For the first time, he let out a deep breath he didn't realize he was holding. "You're right. You're not her. And maybe this time, I can make things right." Their training sessions grew more intense. Jonathan introduced resistance bands, balance drills, and even short walks outdoors. The first time Emily walked without a cane, just a few shaky steps, she laughed and cried at the same time. Jonathan caught her when her knees buckled, holding her close as she whispered, "I'm doing it. I'm really doing it." But their victory was cut short. A week later, Jonathan received a summons. He was to attend a formal hearing before the medical board. If he didn't comply, he would be arrested. William offered to hire the best lawyers, but Jonathan knew the board wanted to make an example out of him. "They won't listen," he told William. "They've already decided I'm guilty." Emily refused to let him face it alone. "Then I'll go too. They need to hear from me." Jonathan hesitated, knowing the pressure would be enormous. But when he saw the determination in her eyes, he nodded. "We'll face them together." The night before the hearing, Emily couldn't sleep. She came to the workshop, where Jonathan was carving a small wooden heart. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. He shook his head. "Too many ghosts in my head." She wheeled closer. "You know, no matter what happens tomorrow, you've changed my life. Even if they take everything from you, they can't take that." Jonathan looked at her, his chest tight with emotion. "You've changed mine too." In that quiet moment, surrounded by wood shavings and the smell of cedar, they both knew the fight ahead would be brutal. But they also knew they weren't alone anymore. The next day, they entered the courthouse together. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions. Flashbulbs went off. Emily walked slowly, supported by her cane, every step a defiance of the odds stacked against them. Jonathan walked beside her, no longer hiding from the world. Inside, the room was packed. Doctors, officials, and media filled every seat. At the front, the board members sat with cold expressions. Dr. Green was among them, his gaze sharp and unforgiving. As the hearing began, accusations flew, claims of illegal treatment, endangerment, and unethical experimentation. Jonathan listened silently, letting them hurl their words. When it was his turn to speak, he stood tall. "I didn't treat Emily," he said firmly. "I taught her. I gave her tools to heal herself. I didn't break any laws. I broke my own fear." The board seemed unmoved. Then Emily stood, ignoring their protests. With trembling hands, she let go of her cane and took several steps to the center of the room. Gasps filled the air. "My name is Emily Anderson," she said, her voice clear. "6 months ago, I couldn't do this. They told me I'd never do this again. But I'm walking because Dr. Hale believed in me. He didn't experiment on me, he gave me back my life. If you call that unethical, then maybe your rules are broken, not him." The room fell silent. The boardroom was thick with tension. Emily stood at the center, every step she had taken echoing louder than any argument the officials could muster. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the chairwoman of the board cleared her throat, trying to regain control. "Miss Anderson, while your testimony is compelling, we must remind you this is not about your personal experience. This is about whether Dr. Jonathan Hale violated medical regulations." Emily lifted her chin. "My experience is the proof. You want to talk about regulations? Fine. But those rules failed me. They gave up on me. He didn't." Her words cut through the room, leaving an uneasy silence. The board shifted in their seats, clearly unsettled by her conviction. Jonathan watched her with quiet admiration. This young woman who had once been broken was now stronger than anyone in that room. Dr. Green stood, his expression cold. "This is not about emotions. The fact remains Dr. Hale performed unapproved therapy outside of medical oversight. That is a breach of ethics and law. If we allow this, we open the door for every disgraced doctor to experiment on desperate patients." Jonathan rose slowly, facing Green. "You're right, this isn't about emotions. It's about results. And the result is standing right in front of you. Everything we did was non-invasive, safe, and guided by principles of neuroplasticity you refuse to acknowledge because it doesn't fit neatly into your box. I didn't experiment on Emily. I gave her the tools to heal herself, tools medicine had abandoned. The board whispered among themselves. The chairwoman raised a hand. Enough. We will deliberate. Emily returned to her seat beside Jonathan, her hand brushing his. Whatever they decide, she whispered, they can't erase what we've done. The deliberation took hours. Outside, reporters swarmed, eager for a verdict. William paced the hall like a caged lion. Jonathan sat quietly, carving a small piece of wood he had brought with him, each cut steady despite the storm raging around them. Emily watched him, her heart swelling with gratitude and something deeper she couldn't yet name. Finally, the board emerged. The chairwoman's voice was measured. After careful consideration, we find that while Dr. Hale's actions were unconventional and outside formal regulation, there is insufficient evidence of malpractice or harm. However, due to his past record and current lack of a license, he is hereby forbidden from practicing medicine in any official capacity. He may continue his work only under supervised research conditions. It wasn't a full victory, but it wasn't the destruction they feared either. Jonathan exhaled, relief washing over him. Emily reached for his hand. We did it, she said softly. Green looked furious but powerless. As the reporters flooded in, Jonathan slipped away quietly, avoiding the spotlight. Emily found him outside, standing under the blooming cherry trees. They didn't take this from us, she said. No, he replied. But they reminded me that healing isn't about licenses or titles. It's about people. And you, Emily, you're proof of that. The following weeks were a blur of change. Emily's recovery accelerated. She was now walking short distances without a cane, her balance improving daily. The videos of her progress continued to inspire thousands online. Messages poured in from patients around the world, begging to learn the techniques Jonathan had taught her. William used his influence to arrange a meeting with researchers at Boston Medical, offering to fund a program to study Jonathan's methods legally. At first, Jonathan resisted, unwilling to return to the world that had condemned him. But Emily's words convinced him. You have something that can help people, she told him one night in the workshop. You can't keep it locked away just because you're afraid. You taught me not to give up. Now it's your turn. Jonathan looked at her, the girl who had walked into his life and carved away his guilt, and nodded. Okay. Let's do it. Meanwhile, Emily faced her own battles. Her progress was real, but not perfect. Some days her legs felt weak, and fear crept back in. What if this was as far as she'd go? What if she never danced like before? One evening, frustrated after a particularly difficult session, she collapsed onto the workshop floor, tears streaming down her face. Maybe this is it, she whispered. Maybe I'll never be who I was. Jonathan knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. You're right, he said gently. You'll never be who you were. You'll be something stronger. Emily looked at him, her tears turning into a shaky smile. You always know what to say. Only because I've been where you are, he replied. And I know that sometimes, breaking is the only way to become whole. By summer, Jonathan's work had gained quiet recognition. Researchers began visiting the workshop, documenting Emily's progress and studying the neural changes she was experiencing. The program was still unofficial, but it was a start. Jonathan found himself teaching not just Emily, but young doctors eager to learn his approach. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Emily stood in the middle of the workshop, her cane abandoned at the side. Music played softly from a speaker. Slowly, she began to move, first tentative, then with growing confidence. Her steps flowed into a spin, not perfect, but beautiful. Jonathan stood back, watching with tears in his eyes as she danced, her body reclaiming its voice. When she finished, breathless and glowing, she looked at him. I told you I'd dance again. He smiled. And you did. The summer air was thick with the scent of pine as the days grew longer, and with every sunrise Emily seemed to reclaim a piece of herself. She no longer arrived in her wheelchair, she walked, leaning lightly on her cane only when fatigue crept in. Neighbors watched in awe as she moved through town, and whispers of the miracle girl followed her wherever she went. For the first time since the accident, Emily felt the world seeing her not as a victim, but as someone alive, strong, and free. Jonathan's workshop, once a place of solitude, now buzzed with quiet activity. Young researchers, under William's sponsorship, came to observe his techniques. They scribbled notes, took videos, and asked endless questions. Jonathan guided them with patience, but he never let the sessions turn into clinical experiments. "This isn't about data," he reminded them. "It's about people. Never forget that." Emily trained harder than ever, but with each success came new fears. One night, as the moonlight spilled through her window, she confided in her father. "What if I fall again, Dad? What if this is all temporary?" William sat beside her, taking her hand. "Emily, you've already won. Even if you never take another step, you've shown the world what's possible when you refuse to quit. That's something no one can take from you." The breakthrough came during a community fundraiser William had organized to support spinal cord research. The event was held in the town's old theater, packed with families, doctors, and curious onlookers. Jonathan stood at the back, uncomfortable with the attention, while Emily prepared backstage. She wore a simple white dress, her hair pulled back, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a fundraiser, it was her chance to prove to herself she could do what she thought was lost forever. When the lights dimmed, she stepped onto the stage. Gasps rose from the audience as she walked without a cane, her movements graceful yet strong. Music swelled, and she began to dance, not perfectly, not as before, but with a raw beauty that brought tears to every eye in the room. Each step told a story of pain, struggle, and triumph. Jonathan felt his chest tighten as he watched. For a moment, he wasn't in a theater. He was in an operating room years ago, holding his wife's hand, promising her he'd save her. Back then, he failed. But tonight, he was watching a miracle he helped shape. When Emily finished, the room erupted in applause. She bowed, tears streaming down her cheeks. William rose to his feet, clapping harder than anyone. Jonathan remained in the shadows, his heart swelling with pride. After the performance, Emily found Jonathan outside, away from the crowd. The summer night was warm, stars scattered across the sky. "You didn't stay for the praise," she teased, wiping her eyes. "I don't need it," he replied with a small smile. "Tonight was about you, not me." She stepped closer, her voice soft. "You know, none of this would have happened without you. You saved me." Jonathan looked at her, the weight of his past heavy in his gaze. "No, Emily. You saved yourself? I just handed you the knife." She laughed through her tears. "You're terrible at taking credit, you know that?" "Maybe," he said, "but I'm getting better at letting go of the guilt." They stood in silence, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. For Jonathan, it was the first time in years he felt truly at peace. Yet, the storm wasn't fully over. News outlets were now calling for the government to regulate Hale's therapy. Some accused William of using his wealth to bypass laws, while others questioned the legitimacy of Emily's recovery. Anonymous threats arrived, warning Jonathan to stop before someone made sure he did. He considered retreating again, disappearing back into isolation. But every time he thought about giving up, he remembered Emily on that stage, spinning with grace despite the scars. He couldn't walk away, not this time. Emily too faced pressure. Reporters hounded her for interviews, medical companies offered her sponsorships, and critics accused her of being part of a publicity stunt. She turned them all down. "This isn't about fame," she said to Jonathan one afternoon as they worked in the workshop. "This is about helping people like me. People who've been told they're done when they're not." Jonathan nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." A week later, Jonathan received a call from Harvard Medical School. They had seen Emily's performance and the growing evidence of his methods. They wanted him to lead a research program on neurorehabilitation, under full ethical oversight. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, redemption not just for himself, but for the work he had devoted his life to. He hesitated, remembering the pain of his past, the weight of responsibility. But Emily's voice echoed in his mind. You taught me not to give up. Now it's your turn. When he accepted, he felt the chains of his guilt finally breaking. On their last night in the Vermont cabin before leaving for Boston, Jonathan and Emily worked side by side in the workshop one final time. She carved a small wooden star while he finished a delicate figurine of a dancer in mid-spin. When they were done, they exchanged carvings silently, no words needed. As the first light of dawn spilled into the workshop, Jonathan knew this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something far greater than either of them had imagined. The transition to Boston was overwhelming. Jonathan hadn't stepped into a hospital or research institution in years, yet here he was, walking through the halls of Harvard Medical School, surrounded by eager young doctors and researchers who looked at him with curiosity and skepticism in equal measure. Emily walked beside him, her steps steady, her confidence a beacon that kept him moving forward. Their new program began quietly. Jonathan worked tirelessly, demonstrating how fine motor training, combined with targeted mental exercises, could reawaken dormant neural pathways. Emily became not just a patient but a teacher, guiding other spinal injury patients with empathy that no textbook could offer. Slowly, a small group of patients began to show progress, tiny movements that grew into something remarkable. The media picked up the story quickly. Headlines read, "Disgraced surgeon's controversial methods show results," and "Miracle or madness? The Hale approach divides the medical world." Supporters hailed Jonathan as a visionary, critics branded him as reckless. Through it all, Emily stood by him. Despite the progress, the program faced intense scrutiny. Ethical committees questioned every step, demanding endless documentation. Pharmaceutical companies, threatened by the idea of a low-cost, non-invasive therapy, lobbied against the research. The pressure mounted daily. One evening, after an exhausting day of defending his work to a panel of skeptics, Jonathan sat alone in his office, staring at the city lights. Emily entered quietly, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You're thinking about walking away, aren't you?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Every day I ask myself if this fight is worth it." Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. "It is. Because this isn't just about me anymore. There are people out there who need this. Who need you." Jonathan looked at her, her words cutting through his doubt. "You always know what to say." She smiled. "You taught me." Weeks later, Harvard invited Jonathan and Emily to present their findings at an international medical ethics conference. It was a chance to silence critics, or be destroyed by them. Jonathan dreaded it, but Emily was excited. "We've come this far," she said. "It's time to tell the world." The conference hall was enormous, packed with some of the greatest minds in medicine. Jonathan stood at the podium, his notes trembling in his hands. As he spoke, his voice grew steadier. He explained the science behind his methods, the evidence they had gathered, and the lives they had already changed. But he knew data wasn't enough. When his speech ended, Emily took the stage. She wasn't scheduled to speak, but she asked for the microphone, her presence commanding the room. "I am not a statistic," she began, her voice clear. "I am a human being who was told my life was over. I was told to accept a wheelchair, to stop dreaming. But I stand here today because one man believed healing is more than medicine, it's hope, courage, and connection. You can call his methods controversial, but you can't deny what's standing in front of you. You can't deny me." The room erupted in applause. Even some of the harshest critics rose to their feet, moved by the raw power of her words. After the conference, everything changed. The research program gained official approval, funding increased, and doctors from around the world came to learn Jonathan's techniques. What had once been a fight for survival was now a movement, one that placed patients at the center of their own healing. Emily, too, found her voice. She began speaking at universities, rehabilitation centers, and medical panels, sharing her journey and advocating for patient rights. Her speeches inspired countless individuals facing disabilities, giving them hope where they had none. But even as success grew, Jonathan remained humble. He still spent his evenings in the workshop he had built in Boston, carving wood as he had in Vermont. For him, the workshop was a reminder of where it all began, a quiet place where healing started with a single block of wood and a belief in something bigger than fear. Emily often joined him there. One night, as she traced her fingers over a wooden dancer he had carved, she said, "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Jonathan smiled faintly. "Every day. And I think about Claire too. I think she'd be proud." Emily touched his arm. "She would be. Because you turned your pain into something beautiful." Months later, Jonathan and Emily received an invitation to deliver the keynote speech at the upcoming Harvard medical graduation ceremony. It was an honor Jonathan never expected to have again. Standing before the crowd of new doctors, he shared the lessons he had learned, not from textbooks, but from failure, loss, and a young woman's courage. When he finished, Emily took the microphone for the final words. "Doctors, never forget that healing isn't just about curing disease. It's about restoring life. It's about listening, believing, and giving hope when hope is all someone has left. That's what saved me. And it can save others too." The hall gave them a standing ovation, a moment Jonathan knew he would never forget. Later that night, as they walked through Harvard's courtyard under a sky full of stars, Emily paused. "Do you ever feel like we were meant to find each other?" Jonathan looked at her, his voice soft. "I don't just feel it. I know it." The graduation ceremony had ended hours ago, but Jonathan and Emily lingered on the empty campus lawn, basking in the glow of everything they had overcome. The weight that had once pressed on Jonathan's shoulders, years of guilt, fear, and self-exile, had finally lifted. For the first time in over a decade, he could breathe without pain. The following weeks were filled with change. The Hale method, as the media now called it, was officially recognized as a groundbreaking approach in neurorehabilitation. Hospitals across the country began integrating his techniques into recovery programs. Jonathan, once an outcast, was now being invited to lead international collaborations. Yet, he remained the same man who preferred the smell of wood shavings to the flashing of cameras. Emily continued to thrive. Her recovery had surpassed even the most optimistic predictions. She could walk for long periods without assistance, and though her legs occasionally reminded her of the accident, she didn't let it hold her back. More than that, she found purpose in speaking for those who had no voice. She became a fierce advocate for patients' rights, traveling across the country to ensure others received the respect and choices they deserved. One late autumn afternoon, Jonathan returned to Vermont for the first time since moving to Boston. He walked up the familiar path to his old cabin, now covered in fallen leaves. Emily had insisted on joining him. Together they entered the dusty workshop where everything had begun. Emily ran her fingers over the old carvings, her eyes soft with nostalgia. "It feels like a lifetime ago," she said. Jonathan smiled. "It was. This place saved me as much as it saved you." She looked at him. "Do you ever regret leaving medicine back then?" "No," he said after a pause. "Because if I hadn't, I wouldn't have found this path. And I wouldn't have found you." Emily's throat tightened, her eyes glistening. "You changed my life, Jonathan." He shook his head. "No, Emily. You changed mine." That evening, as the sun set behind the trees, they sat on the porch, sipping tea. Emily leaned her head against the wooden railing, her voice quiet. "You know, I used to think the accident ruined my life. But maybe it gave me something I never would have had otherwise, a chance to see what I'm truly capable of." Jonathan nodded. "Sometimes, the worst pain is what shapes us into who we're meant to be." Months later, the first official Hale Neurorecovery Center opened in Boston. The building was modern and filled with light, designed to feel more like a sanctuary than a hospital. Jonathan stood at the entrance during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, humbled by the crowd of patients, families, and doctors who had gathered. Emily stood beside him, holding the scissors with him as they cut the ribbon together. The cheers echoed through the courtyard, but Jonathan barely heard them. All he could think about was how far they had come from those dark days when hope seemed impossible. Years passed. Emily's story became legendary in the medical community, a case study in both physical recovery and human resilience. She continued dancing, not as a performer on grand stages, but as a teacher, helping others with disabilities express themselves through movement. Her advocacy work shaped policies and inspired countless lives. Jonathan remained the quiet force behind the movement. Though he rarely sought attention, his name became synonymous with compassionate innovation. In his office, he kept a single carving on his desk, the wooden dancer Emily had made in the Vermont workshop. It was a reminder that healing was never just about science, it was about the human spirit. On a crisp spring day several years later, Emily stood on a stage at a global medical summit, now a respected leader in her own right. She looked out at the sea of doctors and researchers, her voice steady. "When I was paralyzed, I thought my story was over. But someone believed my life still had chapters left to write. Jonathan Hale taught me that healing isn't only about fixing the body, it's about restoring the soul. Today, I stand here because of that belief. And I promise to carry it forward so no patient is ever left behind." The audience rose to its feet, applauding. Jonathan, sitting in the front row, smiled through tears. His life's work wasn't just in the therapy he had created, it was in the lives transformed because of it. That night, under the same stars that had watched over them in Vermont, Jonathan and Emily walked through the garden of the new research center. Neither spoke for a long time, letting the quiet speak for them. Finally, Emily said, "Do you think we've done enough?" Jonathan looked at her with a peaceful smile. "We've done more than enough. But the best part? This is only the beginning." As they walked under the glowing lights, the world felt vast and full of promise, proof that from the deepest pain can rise the brightest light.